Hello and welcome. I'm Mariana Trapnell, President and Chief Excel Geek here at Accelerations. Today, I'd like to introduce you to one of my nearest and dearest friends, the pivot table. You might have come across them in the past. Maybe someone sent you a file with a pivot table in it that looked pretty cool. Were you afraid to touch it in case it broke? Well, in the next few videos, I'd love to show you how easy it is to create and modify pivot tables to your heart's content. They'll take your analysis to the next level almost instantly, making it fast and easy to create quick summaries, look at trends, and even create reports that easily refresh when you add new data next month. Want to see? Let's take a look at how to create one first. All right, we're going to look at instant analysis with time-saving pivot tables. So the first thing you need to know is that you need to prepare your data. Then you insert the pivot table. Then you add the rows and columns. And then you, of course, review your results. So the first step, as we said, is to prepare your data. So let's take a look at this GL detail that we've downloaded for the past few months. You can see this is January to April. And if I look at my data using control down arrow, I can see there are 16,000 rows, and there's the bottom of my data looking at April. So that's an awful lot of data if you're trying to analyze it just in a block of data like this. It's pretty scary and probably will scare most people away because it's not all that useful. All right, so let's take a look at what we've got here. We've got headers across the top, which is very important. Let's take a look at my next slide here. So we've got a block of data, and then we've got headers. And for pivot tables, each column has to have a header name because the pivot table needs to know what to call the data that's within each of those columns. Okay, so that's very important. You can't have any blanks up here. The next thing you need to be aware of is that it's one data type in each column. So in this case, we've got dates down here. We've got some text going down here. Account numbers, which in this case are values, but they could be text as well. More text, and then we've got our amounts, which are obviously values. And then we've got what the source is. The BU, again, could be text or value, because we're not going to be adding BUs together to get 100 plus 400 equals 500 or anything. And then we've got some more text under BU name. All right, and then the last thing we need to note is that in order to create a pivot table, the data has to repeat on each row. So for instance, in our GL detail here, you can see that account 4100 is repeating all the way down in each of the rows that it applies to. You can't actually just have it as a summary like this. That wouldn't work in order to create a pivot table. It wouldn't recognize that these values are actually beverage revenue. So let's put that back. That was just Control Z to undo. And that is pretty much all we need in order to do our data preparation. So the next step, as we said, is to insert the pivot table. Now here's the fun part. It is super easy to do. All I'm going to do is select all my data. So because I've got it all in a big block, I can hit Control A to select everything. And then all I'm going to do is hit Insert and then Pivot Table. Now I'll just point out there is a recommended pivot tables, and Excel tries to be helpful and shows you some various views you could see of your data, so you could see it summarizing by business unit. But here it's actually doing a sum of the BU number, as we talked about. Not very useful. We've got some counts in here, but quite honestly, pivot tables are so easy to make that you might as well just insert a blank one. Okay, so I'm going to go Insert Pivot Table, and I'm going to hit OK. That's all I need to do in this screen is just hit OK. And you can see it's created a new tab for me, and it's created this blank pivot table. So all I want to do at this point is just look at some summaries in my data. So I want to see totals by account. So I'm going to drag account down to this rows box down at the bottom here. I'm just going to move this up a bit. And I'm going to drag amount over into the values. Makes sense, right? So now you can see, because I've got values in that amount column, as we talked about here, they're all values. When I drag it into the pivot table, it automatically says, oh, Mariana wants to do a sum of the amount. Good, we will do that. So now you can see, I mentioned it's easy to do quick summaries. Well, here's a quick summary. I can see account 4100 had a grand total for January to April of whatever that number is. 31 billion by the looks of it, something to that effect. All right, so now the one last thing I'm going to show you today is that it would be nice to know what each of these accounts actually is. So I'm going to add in the account description as well. And again, super easy to do. You just drag it down, and I want to add it after the account number. So I'm just dragging it down right underneath that. And now my pivot table shows me beverages revenue, perishables revenue, et cetera, all the way down. All right. And that is it for pivot tables today. So you can see, super easy to do. I've got an instant summary. I didn't have to add subtotals to my data or anything. My data is still in its initial form. I didn't touch anything in there. So that's really easy going forward as well if I want to do any further analysis. My data is intact. All right, so next slide. Do you have any thoughts or questions or comments on pivot tables? I'd love to hear what you think of them. And if you haven't ever created a pivot table before, I strongly encourage you to just find like a little block of data. It doesn't have to have many rows. Even 8 would be great. And try creating a pivot table, and you'll see how easy it is to do. And let me know how it goes. Also, I just wanted to let you know that I have a pivot tables report checklist for you. For those of you who have created pivot tables or those who are just getting started, it'll hopefully help give you some ideas around things you can do with pivot tables when you're creating reports. And as you can see from the link there, it's accelerations.com, X-C-E-L-L, as in accelerations.com/pivot tables course. There's a foreshadowing for you. I'm actually working on a pivot tables course right now, so hopefully that'll be of interest to some of you in the near future here. So keep an eye out for that as well. If you download the checklist, I will actually add you to the mailing list to let you know when the course is available as well. So feel free to download that if you're interested. And that's it for this week. I hope to see you again next week. Thanks for stopping by.